Mail. Okay, enjoy this session. I am Astrid Kappers from Eindhoven University of Technology in the Netherlands, and I will give you some background on thermal and vibratory perception. After my talk, Meerte Plezier, my colleague, will present the results and the experiments we did for the SUITCEYES project. Now, one of the goals of SUITCEYES was to explore new ideas about how information could be conveyed by means other than visual or auditory channels. Now, you know that our target population are persons with deaf blindness, so it's obvious that vision and audition are not optimal for use with this target population. So what comes to mind directly is to use touch. Now, touch can be used in many different ways, for example, pressure, thermal stimulation, vibration, squeezing. But within the SUITCEYES project, we only addressed thermal stimulation and vibration. And what I will do is to give you some background here, and then Meerte will present some actual experiments and results. But from both our talks, there will be two main messages. And the first is that touch perception is not veridical, and that means that you do not always correctly perceive the stimulation that is presented to you. And second, that vibration is of potential interest to use in all kinds of devices. I will start with thermal perception and some illusions. So if you have a stimulus consisting of 3 items, 2 warm and 1 neutral in the middle, and these could be coins, for example, that have been heated, and you have to place your fingers on it, so the index finger and the ring finger on the warm stimuli and the middle finger on the neutral one, and well, you would expect that you perceive it as warm, neutral, warm, but that's not the case. You will feel this as warm, warm, warm. So the perception of the ring finger that actually touches a neutral stimulus will still be that it touches something warm. Something similar is if you have 2 cold stimuli and a neutral one and you place your fingers on it, then it's not felt as cold, neutral, cold. No, it's felt as cold, cold, cold. So again, the middle finger feels, gets the same perception as that of the ring finger and the index finger. You could easily test it at home, so take a few coins of the same value, place them in the fridge or heat them up with hot water, and you can do the experiment. So I invite you to do this experiment later yourself. Now, what happens if you have 3 warm stimuli and you place your fingers on it? How will that be felt? Because if the middle one was neutral, it felt as warm. Now, if it's warm, how does it feel? And interestingly, it now feels as very warm. So it is as if the temperatures of the presented to the ring finger and the index finger are somehow summed to that of the middle finger. And something similar happens if you present 3 cold stimuli. The middle one will feel as very cold. And this effect is called thermal referral. So this is one example of what I mentioned before, that touch perception is not veridical. You do not always perceive it as it actually is. Another interesting illusion is the thermal grill illusion. So if you have a number of bars of a certain temperature, let's say 20 degrees, this is below hand temperature, which is usually around 30 degrees. And if you place your hand on these bars, yeah, it will feel as a bit cold. That's not surprising. Similarly, if you have a number of bars of a temperature of 40 degrees Celsius and you place your hand on it, it will be perceived as warm because these bars are warmer than your hand temperature. Now, something interesting happens if you interlace these bars. So you have a cold bar, a warm bar, a cold bar, a warm bar, etc. So the same bars that you had in the previous experiment. So half of them are of 20 degrees Celsius, the other half are 40 degrees Celsius, so the average temperature is 30 degrees. And you place your hand on it, and what you would expect is that it feels as neutral because it's, yeah, the average temperature, the actual average temperature is 30 degrees. That's about the same as hand temperature, so it should be perceived as neutral, but that's not at all the case. What you perceive as you place your hand on such a, what is called a thermal grill, it gives you a painful and a burning sensation. And I'm not going into any details about the explanation, but again, I want to stress is that perception is not veridical. Now, we also did a literature research, and from these examples and the literature results, we can summarize that thermal resolution is poor, thermal perception is not veridical. There are various thermal illusions. I've presented two, but there are many more. Thermal perception is slow. That need not be surprising because you need heat conductance or cold conductance, and that takes time. However, in the literature we could also find a number of prototypes. These are still very simple devices that might be useful in communication, and especially nowadays that we have many contacts via Zoom or Skype or MS Teams, then it's always contact at a distance, and it would be nice if I could convey more than just what I'm telling you. And so people tried it with thermal stimulation, that you could present a warm stimulus by pressing a button so that the other people could feel, oh, she's thinking of me, or she likes me to be there, things like that. So there have been some pilot experiments in that direction that are interesting. However, in SUITCEYES, we decided to do no further research on thermal stimulation. In the first year we did some pilots, but it was quite complicated to really do it very controlled. Now, another thing I want to present are the 2-point thresholds. And again, this is an easy experiment that you could do yourself, not on yourself, but on some other person. And the task will be, if you have 2 pins, to present them on a body part, and the person has to decide, are there 2 or are there 1 point? Well, you can imagine if the points are very close to each other, you will perceive it as just 1 point. But if you increase the distance, then at some point, at some distance, you will decide correctly that there are 2 points. Now, the very interesting thing is that there are large differences between different body parts. So if you look at this graph and we look at the fingers, then on the fingers a distance of about 2-3 millimeter is already sufficient to be perceived as 2 points. However, if you look on the calf or the thigh or the belly or the back, then you really need several centimeters to perceive this distance as indeed consisting of 2 pins. And this is an average over many different participants, but so that means that there are also persons who need a larger distance, like 9 or 10 centimeters. This is an experiment we often do in courses, and students like it, so probably you should also try it at home and experience that you indeed cannot feel a short distance on your back or on your calf. Now, this has interesting consequences, which was recorded first by Weber in the 1800s. So he presented a certain distance on the finger and the same distance on the forearm. But if a participant had to compare these two distances, then the distance on the finger felt as larger. And the conclusion from Weber was that a distance in a region of high acuity, and high acuity means many receptors, so high density of receptors, and a small 2-point threshold. So distance in such an area feels as larger than the same distance in a region of low acuity. What Weber also found was that if you present two pins of two pressure points on the back in horizontal direction or in vertical direction, and the participant has to decide is it horizontal or vertical, then for the vertical distance to be confident that you give the right answer, the distance has to be larger than in horizontal distance. So that means there is an anisotropy also over a body part. So that means that the receptor density in the horizontal direction is larger than in the vertical direction. And this is not only true for the back, but people have found this for many different body parts. So also on the arm or the hand there is this anisotropy. Another interesting finding is that if the actual stimulation is that you press 2 times or vibrate 2 times at one location on the arm, and then a third stimulation closer to the elbow, then that's not what you actually perceive, but what you perceive is as if the second stimulation is somewhere in between the other two. And this effect has been called the cutaneous rabbit, because it feels as if a rabbit is hopping over your arm. A final effect that I want to present to you is involves intensity and direction. So this is on the back. If you present a stimulus on the back, first a very strong one, and then later at the same location a weak one, that's not perceived as such. What you will perceive is that it feels like a downward movement. So high intensity, it could be a strong vibration followed by a weak vibration, or a strong pressure followed by a weak pressure, that is perceived as a downward movement. And similarly, if you do it in the opposite order, first a weak stimulation followed by a strong one, it is perceived as something moving upwards. So all these effects could play a role if you use vibration or pressure in some device and you want to convey information. Now, that's what I wanted to present to you as some background for the experiments that Meerte will present. So to summarize, spatial resolution varies strongly from place to place. So your fingers are much more sensitive than your back. Distances are not perceived as equal. So that's the 2-point threshold and the acuity that varies over body parts. So there's a distortion of space. But it's also true on a certain body part that you have differences in horizontal and vertical direction. So there's a clear distortion there. And that intensity also will influence the perception of direction and location. Now, this all sounds like, well, it's almost impossible to use such stimulation to convey any information, but that's not how I want to end. I think it's very important that vibrations are easily felt. they are also easily presented. And for example, in your smartphone, there are vibrators that are very small and very cheap, and they can easily be used in all kinds of devices. So it's easy to use vibrations. And we also think that they are potentially useful as a means of conveying information. And that's not only our opinion, but if you look at the literature, and Meert and I made a literature overview for communication with the use of vibrations, and there are many potential devices. Unfortunately, I don't have any time to go into that. And that brings me to my final slide. So Meerte will take over, and she will present our psychophysical experiments and some user studies. Thanks for your attention.
Hi, my name is Meerte Plezier, and I will tell you something about the experiments that we did on perception during this project. So in the project, our task at Technical University of Eindhoven is to perform psychophysics and prototype testing. Well, psychophysics is a method to test how well signals are perceived. So how well information that is sent to the user is perceived. And we do this based on prototypes. So a prototype is developed by usually other partners, sent to us, and we do some testing with it. Then the results of the test can then be used again to improve next prototypes. So this is how this connects to other project partners. I will tell you first what we did when we got the very simplest prototype, and then go on to more complicated prototype later on. So the simplest prototype consisted of 1 vibration motors. As Astrid just told you in the previous talk, is that we use vibration to display information for the users. And vibration can be displayed with vibration motors. I'm showing here one on the screen. This is one that we used in our studies on perception. This is a coin-style vibration motor, as we call it. It's a small flat disc. It's about a centimeter in diameter. And this was connected to a control box. That was the this was the simplest prototype that we had. We also didn't have a textile part to embed the vibration motor in yet. So what we did is we taped this to the arm of participants in our studies. And I'm showing a picture here of that. And this feels a bit similar to when you're wearing a smartwatch or a fitness bracelet that has a vibration motor in it. Now, what kind of information can you send with just 1 vibration motor? Well, what you can do is you can switch your vibration motor on and off repetitively. And what you then get is a series of vibration pulses. And I'm showing these pulses here on the screen. So these are measurements that we did with an accelerometer. I'm showing here the accelerations. So I switch the motor on and off 4 times. This results in 4 vibration pulses. And by varying the number of vibration pulses, you can give users information that can be expressed in numbers. So this can be quantities, this can be how many people are in this room, this can be also the time of day, for instance. The problem with this is that if you go up to larger numbers, so in instance 6, 7, 8, 9, often mistakes start to be made because you have to count the number of vibration pulses, and the more pulses, the more easy it is to make mistakes. So we looked for a way to make this easier for the user to perceive the number and reduce the number of mistakes. What we tested is what happens if you group the vibration pulses together. I am showing an example of that here, where we displayed 2 vibration pulses, then introduced a little bit of a break, and then presented again 2 vibration pulses. So now we are presenting 4 pulses, but grouped in 2 groups of 2. And we did this for varying numbers, and when they were grouped and when they were ungrouped. And each time we asked our participants in our study to tell how many vibration pulses had they felt. And then we looked at the vibration, at the error rate. So I'm showing here the result of the study. On the horizontal axis, there is the number of pulses that we presented. Could be 1 up to 9. On the vertical axis, there is the error rate. So we want this error rate number to be low, because low means few errors were made. And then I'm showing blue dots, which are ungrouped sequences of vibration pulses, and green grouped sequences of vibration pulses. And what is visible in this plot is that the green dots are systematically below the blue dots, especially for larger numbers. This means that fewer mistakes were made when the pulses were presented in a grouped way. So this means that grouping helps. Grouping can improve performance. I have to add to this that is only the case if grouping was anticipated. So if participants knew in advance that the sequence of vibration pulses would be grouped. But this is very useful information to improve the perceptibility of the information that we display. Now moving on to the next prototype where we used 2 vibration motors. Now, what we did is we taped one vibration motor to the one arm and the other one to the other arm. And what we then did is said, well, if the one motor vibrates, this means a dot. And if the other motor vibrates, this means a dash. And then what you are basically displaying is tactile Morse code. Tactile Morse code can be very useful because once you are familiar with the Morse code alphabet, you can send basically any message, because with the tactile Morse code alphabet, you can make any word or any sentence. Now, we wondered how easy it is actually to learn tactile Morse code. That it can be used has been shown before, but often users were either already familiar with Morse code, or they were shown the Morse code alphabet throughout the experiment, and were sometimes also allowed to write the Morse code down. But this is not representative for the situation in which we would want to use this to communicate with a user. Therefore, we investigated how well tactile Morse code can be used if you are never presented with a visual representation of the tactile Morse code and learn it in a completely tactile way. What we did is we had participants come to the lab, participants who were not familiar with Morse code. We gave them 30 minutes to learn letters represented in the Morse code alphabet. After 30 minutes, we would make words out of the letters that they had learned and see how well, whether they were able to, without training ever with words, how well they were able to immediately use the learned information to recognize words. Some positive things that came out of this study is that we found that within 30 minutes, participants were able to learn at least 15 letters. So all participants learned 15 letters or more. We had also participants who even learned the full alphabet within 30 minutes. And directly after, they were able to recognize words. Some disadvantages also is that mistakes increased rapidly with word length. So for letters consisting of 2 or 3 letters, those were relatively often correctly recognized. But for longer words, lots of mistakes were made. Now, this can be partially improved with training, obviously, because there was very little training involved here. Another disadvantage is that displaying tactile Morse code is slow. It has to be displayed quite slowly. This means that sending messages can take very long. So our conclusion from this is that, yes, this tactile Morse code can be useful, but it is mostly suitable for short messages. More advanced prototype, we had 9 vibration motors. And and a tactile part to embed the vibration motors in. Now I'm saying 9 vibration motors. We even had up to 16, but in this example, I will show you the 9 motors. They're represented with dots in this picture that I'm showing in a square-like form, and there are 9. And this is what I'm showing in the picture is the back of a vest, so a wearable the participant could wear. And we could basically place the vibration motors anywhere in this vest. So I placed here 9, but it could also be, let's say, 16 here. We had a second textile, which was not a wearable, but a chairable, because this was a textile cover that can be pulled over the back of a chair. And again, here we can embed the vibration motors anywhere we like. And when we had this prototype, we wanted to investigate how vibrations are perceived, depending on where on the back you present the vibration. Because as Astrid told you in her previous presentation, haptic perception is often not veridical. So we would like to know in what way it is not veridical. So first, we looked into perception of direction. So what is the direction that is perceived between one vibration and a second vibration? How is the orientation between these two vibrations perceived? I'm showing you here a circle with dots and a dot in the center. These represent vibration motors. So this is a bit like a clock that I'm showing you here. These vibration motors were fixed in this clock-like circular pattern on the back of rest of a chair. And then when participants would sit and lean their back against the backrest, the center of this circle would be aligned with the spine. I'm showing you here now a picture of the chair. And I'm also showing you a picture of a dial. The dial was then used by participants to match the direction that they felt between the two vibrations. Now, the result from this experiment, I will show you first the horizontal and the vertical direction. The vertical direction was aligned with the spine, and the horizontal direction was perpendicular to the spine. Results show that these were perceived in the vertical direction pretty much veridical. So they were perceiving this as we presented it also. For the horizontal direction, this felt a little bit pointed downwards. Now, what about the angles in between horizontal and vertical? Well, they were perceived a little bit more distorted. They were perceived more horizontal than they were, these angles, so to say, which means that the whole circle felt compressed in the vertical direction and therefore felt more like an ellipse shape than a circle. So this is important to take into account that vibration locations where you vibrate are perceived not necessarily in the way that you intend them to be. And the second thing that we wondered about this is about how far apart do two vibrations feel. Does it matter where we present the vibrations and also in what orientation? So I'm showing you in the left side, I'm showing a picture or drawing of a back of a person and in dots vibration motors, and they were positioned in a cross-like pattern where most vibration motors were on the right side of the spine, but one vibration motor was on the left side of the spine. And on the right side, I am showing basically, I'm zooming in on these vibration motors, and we tested different situations. So one of the situations that we tested is what if we vibrate one motor, switch it off, vibrate the second motor, and we ask participants how far apart do these feel. And we do this for different distances. So that was the one situation, horizontal distances. What we also did was basically the same thing, but vibrate the vibration motors simultaneously and not sequentially. In a third condition, so to say, we again tested horizontal distances by vibrating the motor sequentially, but now one of the motors was always positioned on the other side of the spine. And the last condition which we tested was vertical distances. So this was the same as the horizontal distances, but now oriented vertically, which means that these distances were oriented in the same direction as the spine. Now, for the results, we find actually that there are quite a lot of differences in the perceived distance depending on how you present, how and where you present the vibrations. I'm showing you a graph with results. On the horizontal axis, there are the different lengths of the different lengths between the two vibrations that we use. So we presented either a distance of 4 centimeter, 8 centimeter, or 12 centimeter. On the vertical axis, there is the response by the participants. And this is not a response in centimeters, this is in arbitrary units. But smaller numbers, or in this case also more negative numbers, means that the distances were perceived as small, smaller than when they when there were larger numbers. So what this means is that the purple condition, which is when we simultaneously presented vibrations in the horizontal direction, distances felt smallest. In fact, actually, the difference between 4 centimeters and 12 centimeters were very difficult to perceive. However, when we presented distances using sequential vibrations in the horizontal direction and placed one vibration motor on the other side of the spine, so now we have a distance that crosses the spine, this was perceived much larger. Distances were perceived much larger in this case. And then actually as largest in all of the conditions that we tried. In between these two most extreme conditions, we have the situation where motors were positioned horizontally or vertically. And what you can see from that is that the vertical distances felt larger than the horizontal distances. So it can make a lot of difference in what location or in what orientation you present vibrations, and even if you switch vibration motors on and off sequentially, or you switch them on simultaneously. This all can make a very large differences in how the distance between two vibrations is perceived, and it has to be taken into account when using vibrations on the back to communicate information to a user. Now, what you can do with vibrations is basically draw a shape. So I'm showing here again the picture of the wearable, of the vest, with on there again blue dots representing vibration motors, and these are 9 dots in a square pattern. And in red, I have a cross. And if I want to draw this cross on the back of a participant with vibrations, I can switch on the vibration motors that are on this path sequentially. So I switch one motor, second motor, third motor across the diagonal. That would be one segment of the cross. And then over the other diagonal, making the other segment of the cross. When we did this initially, we tried with some colleagues and we asked, can you just feel this and draw what you have felt? And one of my colleagues drew this. So this is basically a cross, but it is very compressed in the vertical direction. And that makes sense based on the results that I just show you from our experiments. And you can counteract this by placing vibration motors further apart in the vertical direction than in the horizontal direction. This is a drawing by another colleague of mine, and this is also a bit of a cross, but it's more like a butterfly, so a continuous line. And this happened because the participant connected all the vibrations into a single shape instead of perceiving this as two different line segments. And something like this you can overcome by introducing a longer break between the two line segments. Now, why is this useful? This can be useful to send social haptic communication via vibration. So social haptic communication is a form of tactile sign language where gestures are made with the hand on the back of another person, or sometimes the arm, for instance. I will not go very much into haptic social communication because there will be a lot of information about it in the next talk. But what we did was see if vibration patterns can indeed be used to mimic social haptic communication, so these hand gestures on the back. For this, we collaborated with members of the social haptic communication group in the Netherlands. They teach social haptic communication, and they do this in teacher duos, where one teacher has deaf blindness and the other one doesn't. And we met up with a couple of these duos, and they tried our vibration patterns and also helped us improve them. And I'll show you some examples. For instance, this is an image that I've taken, at the top is an image I've taken from Dutch Handbook Social Haptic Communication, which is the handbook that they use for teaching. And this is the sign for happy. It's basically sort of resembles a smiley face or a smiling mouth. And we mimic that by switching vibration motors on and off in a vibration pattern that sort of mimics this downwards arch that represents a smiley face. And when we presented this to a social haptic user, he immediately said, yes, I think this one means happy, because this, I think this is meant to resemble a smiley face. So this user immediately recognized this pattern, or basically linked this vibration pattern to the sign, or haptis, as this is usually called, that we were indeed trying to imitate. Another example where this immediately worked was the sign for yes, or the haptis for yes, which is basically tapping the hand on the shoulder, or sometimes also the arm. And how we translated this is by switching the top left vibration motor on and off a couple of times. And the user immediately said, oh yeah, this means yes, 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 yes. So although this feels quite different than tapping with the hand, it was immediately linked to the sign that we were trying to imitate. So this is very good news, because it means, because sometimes there was immediate recognition of the vibration pattern. And users also said that they thought it would be very easy to get used to these vibration patterns, which means that, yes, indeed, vibration patterns can be used to emulate social haptic communication. And that opens up a lot of possibilities. In the next talk, there will be a lot more of information about social haptic communication. But for now, I want to thank you for your attention.
Mirte, you might like to look at the question answers. I think there are some questions there.
Yes. Okay. Hi. Yes, I will address some of the questions in the Q&A box. The first question I saw coming in was whether the number of vibration motors will affect how well people will perceive the vibrations. And yes, this will make a difference. And it will depend. So in the first talk, Astrid said something about the 2-point threshold. So if you place motors much closer together than the 2-point threshold, it will not make a lot of difference, because they are not felt as different points of vibration. But if you want to draw a line by switching motors on and off, if you place them closer together, the line will feel smoother. So yes, it helps to have more vibration motors, but there is a limit. So you shouldn't try to go and really place them closer together than the actual 2 points threshold. There was also a question about whether the results would be different if we use ERM motors or LRA motors. Well, actually, in our experiments, we were using ERM motors. there can be some differences, because I think there have been at least one other study where I thought they found that the 2-point threshold for LRA motors is actually lower than for ERM motors. So there are differences in how these types of motors are perceived. But I think, for instance, in terms of distances feeling smaller if motors are switched on simultaneously instead of sequentially, for instance, those types of results I don't really expect to depend on the type of motor that is being used. Then there's a third question. Okay, do you have a sense of achievable vocabulary size for such social haptic communication? Actually, I don't know, but I think the presenters in the next session will have some ideas about this. So we'll leave this question in the Q&A box, and the presenters from the next session will address this one. And I think these were all the questions in the Q&A box.
No, Meerte, there will be a question by Rita.
Ah.
But she still has to type it, so be patient.
Okay, I wait.
She types that she doesn't have a question yet. So.
Okay. 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 There just came one more question in. I think there's still 2 minutes, so can I address that one? Should the tapping be done on one part of the body or how? I guess that the question is one part of the body or two. I think this depends. I guess this relates to the haptic Morse code experiment, mainly. So here we used 2 vibration motors, one on each arm. And here it really does matter if you place the 2 motors on the same arm. This has been this experiment has been done by other researchers. And what they found is that tactile Morse code is easiest to perceive if you present dashes and dots on the 2 separate arms. If you use 2 vibration motors on the same arm, it's more difficult. So for instance, that is an example in which that makes really a difference. Okay, here's Rita's question. Did you manage to mimic no feedback side-to-side movements as yes tapping feedback? No, we only used this one example that I gave for the tapping. We did try to use back and forth movement for no. This one was actually not easy to recognize by the users. And the feedback they gave us that was probably the case because they did feel emotion going back and forth, but they said it was hard to relate it to no because usually the gesture for no is a bit smaller. This is what they said. So I think it's 15:45. So I think we should conclude the session. I see if more questions come in the Q&A box, I will we will answer them by typing the answers. So yeah, thank you very much and see you in the next session.